Hi, everyone. This is Jason Burek of Wall Street for Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street for Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a returning guest. We promised you that we would get him on to answer a lot of our listener questions. He is best-selling author of many best-selling books, including Crisis Investing, Totally Incorrect, Right on the Money. He's a great investor. He's the international man. He's traveled all over the globe, and he's a great speculator. So thank you for joining us again today on a Wall Street for Main Street podcast, Doug Casey, chairman of Casey Research.
Thanks, guys. It's nice to be here.
Hey, Doug, I want to start off the podcast by talking about your background. I know you gave us your background when we met with you a month ago over dinner, but a lot of our listeners don't know much about your background. So let's talk about that. Just talk about your success story, that an entrepreneur, and how and why you decided to become a libertarian and then eventually an anarchist.
Well, I think my background is not terribly relevant. Normal middle-class boy from the south side of Chicago. But as far as becoming a libertarian and an anarchist, I started out, I remember when I was a kid, I thought like a kid, and I remember asking my mother to write a letter to President Eisenhower, who was in office at the time, a letter because I was so shocked when we took a drive through part of Chicago and saw these poor black people living in substandard housing. So I guess I was thinking like a liberal that at that point I somehow thought the president should do something about it. And of course they eventually did and made it much worse. But then I later in high school evolved into being a conservative about when I read Barry Goldwater's book, Conscience of a Conservative. I thought it was an intelligent, reasonable book. Then my next progression was reading Ayn Rand's book, Virtue of Selfishness, which I still think is a work of genius. And at that point, for a short period of time, I identified myself as an objectivist. And objectivists are really like proto-libertarians. But the big break for me was when I read Morris and Linda Tannehill's book, Market for Liberty. And at that point, I realized that I was actually an anarcho-capitalist. And that's where I've been since 1971, and even advanced beyond that. I don't even see that government as an entity serves a useful purpose. It's purely destructive. So that's how I got to where I am. I arrived at that conclusion a long time ago, and I've kind of stayed there. In fact, I'd say I've even gone beyond that. I'd call myself perhaps a Discordian, where although it's true that in the past I used to believe that the whole of the law was to don't aggress against other people or their property, and do all that you say you're going to do. But everybody understands that, and any person of goodwill can abide by that as the law. But I'd take it one further, and I'd say that the whole of the law should be do as thou wilt, but be prepared to accept the consequences. Because if you think in those terms, you're forced to not just robotically follow some law, but to think out the consequences of what you're going to do from a moral and ethical point of view, as well as a practical point of view. So that's my Pilgrim's Progress.
And of course, Doug, the individual is responsible for a lot of this stuff, but government doesn't take responsibility for that. We're seeing that now in areas like Iraq, in areas like the Ukraine. You said recently on another interview that you think the IMF and the World Bank are completely useless and they do a lot of harm. Can you talk more about that? What do you think they do wrong exactly?
Well, they're totally destructive institutions because they were capitalized after World War II by various governments in the world. So you have this bureaucracy that is lending money to governments, in the case of the IMF, and even to private companies in the case of the World Bank, but the decisions that they make have always been for political reasons, first and foremost, not economic reasons. If any of their loans were worthy, the borrowing entities could find private parties that would allocate capital. So they've got this huge pool of capital that they send off to. It's classic. During the '60s, when what's that fool's name that died, who was the Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War? McNamara, right? He almost single-handedly helped to destroy the world economy after he. Well, of course, he almost did that in Vietnam, but went on to destroy the world's ecology by building steel mills in Africa, hundreds and hundreds of miles from coal deposits, and all kinds of complete idiocy. So no, these institutions serve absolutely no useful purpose. They're purely destructive. They don't have any positive aspects at all.
Yeah, and they seem, Doug, to be just monuments of corruption and cronyism and kickbacks. You see the large corporations, they get unbidden contracts. Basically, their foreign subsidiaries are the ones who get a lot of that money from the IMF or the World Bank. And then the money goes into politicians' pockets for bribes. And Jim Rogers, I think an adventure capitalist and also an investment biker, he goes on talking about this, how the NGO agencies who are in charge of distributing some of the money, right, that these large institutions are allowed to distribute, the money goes into the bureaucrats' pockets. These guys are driving very expensive cars. They're driving Mercedes, BMWs, Range Rovers. They have, mansions or very expensive penthouse apartments. And the poor people who are supposed to have gotten the money are not seeing any of it anyway.
It's completely disgusting. But although as much as I'd like to see them be abolished, that's not going to happen. I'm afraid what we're going to have to do is wait for them to collapse as the loans that they've made are never paid back, which I expect will be the case at some time in the future. A lot of the money that they've allocated to bankrupt third world governments will not be paid back, and that's going to devastate their balance sheets. And hopefully, at that time, richer countries, most of whose governments are also bankrupt, won't refinance them, and both the World Bank and the IMF will dry up and blow away.
I find it funny that the mainstream media and the schools taught everybody how the World Bank and IMF were created to help poor countries prosper and give them money and aid when they need it. And they poured trillions of dollars into Africa, and yet there's not much improvement in that continent. There's a few countries here and there that have shown some economic development and improvement.
I would say Africa's doing good because of technology innovation from the free market, not because of those loans from the IMF or World Bank. That's what I would say.
Well, exactly. If anything, it's held them back. The only people that have really profited from those loans from the IMF and the World Bank are the rich politicians and the Swiss bankers that have received that money. I've long said that the IMF and the World Bank were just welfare programs from poor people in rich countries to rich people in poor countries.
And that's a great point. And another thing about the central bank, the IMF and the World Bank, there's an article that came out on Financial Times, and they said that since the 2008 financial crisis, the central bank had put in $29 trillion into the stock market. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I saw that the other day, and I meant to look up what the total market capitalization of the world stock markets is, but I don't think it's anywhere near $29 trillion. So it seems to me that that's a factoid, and a factoid is a word that doesn't mean what most people use it as a small fact, but a factoid relates to facts as androids relate to people. It's an artificial fact. So it's I don't believe it. It's impossible. Let's look. I mean, if you have a computer in front of you, which I don't, you could probably look up value of world stock markets, or just look of value of the U.S. stock market, and it's impossible, I think, for various central banks to have bought $29 trillion worth of stocks.
Yeah, not unless they're also buying up commodities and real estate and bonds and bailing out over-the-counter derivatives too. They'd have to buy up almost all the asset classes, right?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's like 76% of statistics are made up out of thin air on the spot, and I suspect that that's one of them. 29 trillion. It's a ridiculous amount of money to think. Who came up with this ridiculous factoid? Do you know?
Well, supposedly they're releasing a in-depth. The article is just a summary, but supposedly an in-depth report detailing the investments, and it's not just stocks. It's in commodities. It's in real estate. It's in bonds. It's in over-the-counter derivatives. It's coming out in the next couple weeks, revealing all the different places where global central banks have been putting the capital that they've been printing up. Because, when they were on a dollar peg, when China was on a dollar peg, they had to print enormous amounts of money too. So everyone's been printing money. It's not just the U.S.
Well, of course, and they could do it. It would amount to the greatest theft by several orders of magnitude in world history because, of course, they can just really literally print up the money and use the money to buy real assets that go onto the balance sheets of these world banks. But if they had been doing that, I mean, what are the entities that those titles would have been registered in up until this point? And wouldn't anybody know that a relatively small number of entities that they would have designated to take title to whatever they've been buying, wouldn't that have been recognized up until this point? So that's why I discredit it. But could they do it? Sure, they could do it. I mean, they could basically buy everything in the world until the currencies themselves became worthless, but it would be a very effective grand theft. And what would happen then would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the wealth distribution, because of the quantitative easing programs, high taxes, and inflation, has already been enormous. Now, Doug, we have negative interest rates in Europe. One of our listeners is wondering, one second, we have a listener question from Mark Kempton, who's a listener on our YouTube channel. Do you think Yellen is going to introduce negative interest rates in the U.S. While also reducing QE?
Well, these people are incredibly stupid, and I use the word stupid not to say of low IQ, because they have high IQs when it comes to doing calculations and passing IQ tests. I use the word stupid as being as meaning having an unwitting tendency to self-destruction. And if you use that definition of the word stupid, these people are very stupid, because negative interest rates, when you have positive interest rates, it encourages people to save their capital and build capital, and that's how you become wealthy. When you have negative interest rates, it encourages people to consume more and borrow more and indebt themselves more. And debt is all about either borrowing capital and consuming that others have saved in the past or mortgaging your future. So it's incredibly stupid to have these artificially low interest rates. But it's not just Europe that we're talking about, because the nominal interest rates in the U.S. are, well, depending on what we're looking at, 1%, 2%, 3%, something on that order. But actual real inflation in this country is about 10% right now. So we have negative interest rates here, too. Negative real interest rates, not negative nominal interest rates like they have in Europe. But it's bound to result in such a catastrophic disaster that Yellen will be lucky if she's not hung from a lamppost by her heels. Although I've got to say that would be very unseemly for a grandmother.
Well, as long as they keep teaching more people Keynesian economics in schools, more people are going to keep agreeing with them. But that's why we do this podcast. That's why you have Casey Research. That's why you write your books. we're trying to wake people up to the common sense approach. You talked about the central bankers. These guys are PhDs. They're very book smart, but they're ivory tower academics. They have no common sense. Most of them have never worked a real job in their life. They've never run a business. Most of them don't handle their investment portfolio. You cannot invest really with Keynesian economics and become a good investor. And when you study Keynesian economics, it's a disaster. I mean, the stuff I just read Henry Hazlitt's book, Failure of a New Economics, which goes line by line through, the general theory, and the stuff Keynes was writing in there, he basically sounds like a Marxist, and it sounds like he doesn't understand, wages, prices, supply, demand. He doesn't understand any of this stuff. I can't believe we're still using Keynesian economics and everything has not collapsed yet.
Yeah, you're quite correct. I guess it's because people really do like to run in herds, and nobody likes to argue with somebody that's got a PhD degree, and it's really quite absurd. But that's the world we live in.
Ironically, Keynes was actually not bad of an investor when he was around back in the day.
Well, if he was around today, though, he wouldn't even have to be a good investor if he was a high government official like Yellen, because even if her investment returns were horrible and she lost all her money, once she's the ex-Fed chairman, she'll get a delayed payoff. She'll start collecting six figures for giving speeches, and she'll get multi-million-dollar book contracts, and she'll get corporate directorships, and she'll get consulting fees, and she'll get her $50 million payoff after she's out of office. So she doesn't have to care about investing. None of these people. Same with Bernanke or the Clintons and so forth. It's all very corrupt.
Yeah, Bernanke is living the dream right now with all the fees and consulting fees and speeches that he's doing right now. I think David Einhorn, I heard David Einhorn paid him $300,000 to have dinner with him and to discuss the relationship Wall Street has with the Federal Reserve. I think, Jason, you mentioned this before.
Yes, of course, and that's just a rounding figure for Einhorn, the way all the money is. I mean, because all the rich people, the ones that would be defined as members of the deep state, to use that Turkish term, which is gaining a little bit of traction, and I rather like. These are not just high government officials, but people that control the media, that control financial institutions, big corporations, so forth. They stand so close to the fire hose of money that spews forth from the central banks and the governments of the world. They can drink to the bursting point. So that's why the rich are getting richer today, because the government is getting bigger and it spends money, and the recipients of this money are members of the deep state. So it's going to keep getting worse until we have a genuine crisis, which I think is reasonably near at hand, at which point anything could happen. Things could get better, but more likely things will get worse, just like in 1789 when the French Revolution overthrew Louis XVI, something which I thought was a wonderful thing. Then it got worse after Robespierre took over, so that's entirely possible to happen throughout the Western world.
Yeah, I agree. Things are, unfortunately, Doug, I think are going to get a lot worse before they get better. There's just not that many libertarians here in the U.S. There's not a lot of entrepreneurs, although there is, still some in Silicon Valley, but the majority of our population here in the U.S. is not entrepreneurially oriented. They're not libertarians. They don't want to pay low taxes. A lot of them are docile sheeple who like, reality TV, who eat unhealthy foods and are fat and watch, too much bad TV instead of reading a book or a podcast, reading one of your books or listening to one of our podcasts. And, unfortunately, I think things are going to get a lot worse. Like I said, you were here in D.C., and, you saw all the new buildings that we're building. You drove around a little bit, and you saw some of the new shopping centers. And, I mean, these guys are parasites. It's the parasite class. They live a lot better than normal people, middle-class people who have to work, very, very hard. Some of the middle-class people here in the U.S. now are working 2 or 3 part-time jobs just to pay their rent and food bill. If you're a government person, some of them are making 6 figures, and they have 2 or 3 degrees, and, they're not being judged by their failures or anything like that, and they could basically screw up a dozen times and still not get fired, and they might even get promoted still.
Well, that's right. The average government employee is making 50 to even 100% more than his more or less equivalent in the private sector would be. So, and it's true that in Silicon Valley there are more libertarians per capita than other parts of the country. But, for instance, Silicon Valley has been completely captured by the deep state. This deal that Elon Musk is doing to build a gigantic lithium battery factory that's going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars. Apparently, most of that's being financed by the U.S. military. So all these computer companies and all these entrepreneurs in that area in Silicon Valley, they've been completely captured by the state and the people that are in it too. There's no help from that quarter.
They're putting backdoor stuff, in hardware and software that the large cap American technology companies can't even control, and there's side venture capital arms, for the CIA and other government agencies that are allocating capital into some technologies, that probably in a free market there wouldn't be any demand for, but because the government basically has an unlimited spending budget, they're funding technologies that are dangerous, to our freedoms and liberties.
Yeah, it's really a bad situation, and I don't see how it's going to improve anytime in the near future.
Now, Doug, we touched on Africa a little bit. I want to go back to that, and we have a question from one of our listeners. His name is Corbin Hudderberg, and his question is, Doug, you talked about Africa and referred it to the last wild frontier, and said if you're young and looking to be a billionaire, you would go to Africa. What opportunities do you see there, and particularly what opportunity do you see there for young people?
Well, here's the thing. When you go to a place like Africa, which gets very little in the way of casual tourism, and even if you're a young person there that doesn't have a great deal of experience or capital, you're going to be unusual. You're going to be the only American or Canadian or whatever it is in town if you roll into some place in Nigeria or Togo or Benin or the Central African Republic, which they're still chopping each other up with machetes, but that's not going to go on forever, and it keeps out the real lightweights. You show up there, and within a week, you can easily find yourself in the office of the richest guy in the country, or for that matter, the president of the country, and because the experiences and the capital that you have as an American, a young American, that just makes you one of tens of millions of people. Nothing to distinguish you. But if you go to some nothing-nowhere place in Africa, your experiences, your contacts, and what money you have are going to put you in the top 0.1% of the country automatically. And that's a good place to start. And all the growth in the future is going to be in Africa from many points of view, I think. So no disadvantages, lots of advantages. Forget about Europe. Forget about the Orient even. Forget about South America. No, Africa is the place to be.
And what Africa needs right now is more entrepreneurs, capital, innovators, stuff like that. They don't need foreign aid because the government has been getting trillions of dollars of foreign aid and nothing has come out of it. So I think Africa, what they need now is more businesses and entrepreneurs rather than...
You're absolutely right. If you go to one of these obscure countries in Africa and just stick your nose into everything that you can, meet as many people as you can, get on the telephone and dial as many businesses as you can, and get appointments with the presidents of these companies, find out what they need, And then you work it from the other end. You come back to North America and see if you can't supply the capital or the expertise or God knows what it is, some business that might want to expand in a new market, and take your percentage. I mean, it's entirely possible.
Yeah, there's probably, Doug, some basic consumer businesses that all three of us take for granted here in the U.S. that people in Africa may not have. So, in Africa they have cell phones now. They have access to Bitcoin. There may be some Bitcoin-related African businesses that people can use there to stay away, because I know Africa has another reason besides, the violence in Africa. Africa has had a really bad perpetual inflation problem. Almost all the governments there have been, perpetual inflators, basically humongous inflation borderline on hyperinflation like Zimbabwe for many decades.
That's quite correct. So if you're looking for opportunity, take out your atlas and buy a ticket that will take you around to a few countries, take a few months off, put aside some money to do that. Doesn't have to cost a whole lot, and it could change your life.
Now, switching topics, Doug, I have another question from one of our YouTube listeners, Top Flight. His question is, based on your analysis, what speculation today has the highest intrinsic value relative to price?
Well, in my view, almost all of the world's markets right now are overpriced, and bonds in particular are in a bubble. It's going to be a catastrophe when interest rates rise, and they will rise back to the levels that they were in the early 1980s when this great bull market in bonds started. So there are a number of things you could do. I would look at bonds from the short side. I'd look at Japanese yen bonds, especially from the short side. That way you can make it both as Japanese interest rates go up and the Japanese yen collapses. You can put out a hedge where you're short Japanese bonds, long Japanese stocks, which are relatively cheap, although, as I said, almost nothing's cheap today. But to make it easy, my specialty for many years has been in these mining exploration stocks, and most of them are crap, they're garbage, they have no intrinsic value, but there are thousands of them out there, and some of them are actually quite interesting. And at this particular moment, as we speak, that market is devastated. It is a really cheap market where these things, a lot of them are selling for less than the cash in the bank. And even the good ones, you get the management and you get the properties and other data banks for free, less than free, because they're less than cash in the bank. So I think that as these governments continue inflating, and they will, it's going to create other bubbles. And I think there's going to be a bubble again in precious metals, and I think there's a good chance there's going to be a super bubble in mining stocks. So the possibility exists to hit a long ball home run there, and by that I mean 10 to 1, 50 to 1, 100 to 1 is possible. So I'd look there at this time. Most people won't think of looking there until after they've already made the headlines and they've gone up in price 10 times, and it's the wrong time to be buying. But now's a good time, I think.
And the mining stocks have been undervalued for almost a year now, since the gold and silver prices went down from their highs. So the mining stock is a lot of value there, but people need to be careful and really study the company and the management and make sure their viable business and their business plan is good, because there's a lot of management out there that don't know what they're doing, and they just going about their day one day at a time, and
first-class plane tickets, 5-star hotels to junior mining conferences, and diluting your shareholders.
You're absolutely correct. So, and since there are a couple thousand of these companies, it takes a long time to sort through the data and find the gems among the pieces of cinder.
Yeah, sentiment, we've been in a cyclical bear market now in gold stocks and gold and silver for 3 years. There was some false hopes where we might have been out of it, a couple different times in the last 12 months or so, but we've still been, going sideways. But I mean, sentiment is so low that people who are willing to be patient, who are not buying all of their position at once, who are not, buying these things on margin is suicide. But yeah, I think long term, the cycle is going to eventually turn. I think in terms of supply and demand, I think it's really clear that people in Asia are buying more metal and demand is rising, and there's no incentive whatsoever for the miners to continue to increase mining supply at these prices.
Quite correct. I agree.
Okay, great. Well, Doug Casey, we like to thank you for coming on Wall Street from Main Street podcast. If people want to find out more about what you do and find your work, where can they go?
Well, they can go to caseyresearch.com, and I do like the last two books that I've put out. One is called Totally Incorrect, and the other one's called Right on the Money, and Amazon has them, and I'm actually pretty pleased with them. So if you are interested in the way I'm thinking about these things, there's a huge amount in those two books.
Okay, great. Have you ever thought about rewriting any of your older books that you wrote?
No, I'm not doing any more nonfiction books, quite frankly. I'm working on a sextet of novels. And
okay.
The first one ought to be out within 6 months. I talked to you guys about that at dinner. Traced
yes.
the career of our hero through 6 unjustly besmirched but highly politically correct occupations. So the first one of those will be out certainly within 6 months.
Okay, great. We look forward to it. So, Doug, thank you for your time, and hopefully you can come back on again soon.
Okay, gentlemen. Have a good one.